Coanites. General characteristics. Form various, generally either funnel-shaped, spherical, globular, or subcylindrical, having a central opening in the superior part. The original composed of a parenchymatous substance capable of imbibition and contraction, the base fixed. The fossil zoophytes which this genus is intended to comprehend are very numerous and hold an intermediate place between the Alcyonia properly so called, and the ventriculites. They are distinguished from the former by the central cavity in their superior part, and from the latter by being destitute of an external reticulated integument, etc., and possessing but a slight degree of contractile power. The Alcyonium ficus of Linné, figure de substance d'éponge et d'alcyon of Marsilly, may be considered as the type of the genus. It is of the form of a fig, being attached to the rocks by branches proceeding from its smaller end. The upper part is a little flattened and has a cavity in the middle. Its color resembles that of tobacco, and its parenchymatous substance cannot be compared to anything better than to nutgalls when well dried. The fossil remains of this genus, hitherto indiscriminately placed among the Alcyonia, were first noticed by Mr. Guettard at Verest and at Montricard in Touraine, and form the subject of a paper published in the Memoirs of the Academy of Sciences at Paris, annum 1757. He observes that they are of a globular form, having the base in many examples elongated into a pedicle. In the center of the superior part is a circular opening, generally filled with the substance in which the fossils are embedded. This cavity is larger in its upper than in its lower part, and is continued almost to the pedicle, in some specimens appearing to penetrate it. From the circumference of the opening, lines may be traced that not only pass over the whole of the spherical part, where they form striae more or less distinct, but also penetrate the substance of the zoophyte. There is seldom more than one opening, but instances have occurred in which there were three. The fossils represented in Plate 9, figures 1, 3, 4, 6, 8, and Plate 11, figure 8, Organic Remains, Volume 2, belong to this genus. (22) Coanites subrotundus, Tablet 15, figure 2. Depressed, subrotund, central cavity small, external surface smooth. This species is generally termed ficoid alcyonite by collectors, from its supposed resemblance to a fig. The surface is smooth and wholly destitute of markings, the cavity nearly circular. The depressed form of the specimens is probably owing to compression. In the specimen figured, 3 of these bodies are attached to a block of chalk, of which substance they are composed. Localities: Upper Chalk, near Lewis. 23. Coanites flexuosus, Tablet 15, figure 1. Cyathiform, margin of the central depression marked with flexuous indentations. The radical processes long and fibrous. Base fixed by radical processes. The specimen figured is enveloped in flint. Localities: Upper Chalk, near Lewis. Very rare. "24. Coanites Konigi, Tablet 16, figures 19, 20, 21. Inversely conical, externally marked with irregular fibers, some of which penetrate the substance and terminate in openings on the inner surface. Central cavity cylindrical, deep, narrow. Base fixed by radical processes. This species is for the most part enveloped in large irregular flints, which exhibit but slight traces externally of the body they enclose. The superior part, figure 19, presents a convex surface with a cylindrical body in the center, from whence interrupted fibers, slightly relieved, ramify in a radiating manner towards the margin. At the base, numerous perforations are observed, affording a passage for the radical processes. The vertical section, figure 20, exposes the cylindrical cavity filled with silex, and the substance of the zoophyte traversed by numerous fibers, or tubes, some of which appear to terminate on the outer and others on the inner surface. These are still more distinctly shown in the horizontal section, figure 21. Mr. Parkinson represents a very fine example. Organic Remains, Volume 2, Tablet 9, Figure 1, of the outer surface, in which the fibers are more regularly disposed than in the Sussex specimens. The species is named in honor of Charles Koenig, Esquire of the British Museum. Localities: common among the loose flints beneath the turf, near Lewis Racecourse. It appears to have been abundant in the upper beds of the chalk, but seldom occurs in our quarries. 25. Lunalites, Tablet 16, figure 22, 23, 24. The fossils here represented are convex above and concave beneath. The concavity is smooth, with the exception of a few circular markings which appear like lines of increase. The convex side is rough, and when viewed through a lens, exhibits a porous structure. The specimens are solid, their constituent substance a spathous carbonate of lime. These bodies, in their general appearance, resemble a species of lunalites from Bologna, which Mr. Koenig, from the perforations on its surface, has named L. digitale, but they are destitute of the diverging radiated sulci on the concave part, and these appear to be an essential character of the genus. Figure 22, perspective view of a specimen placed on its apex. Figure 23, the base or concavity. Figure 24, a lateral view. Localities: Upper Chalk, South Street, Lewis. Encrinites and Pentacrinites. This name has long been applied to the petrified skeletons of those zoophytes that possess a pelvis or basin, composed of an immense number of crustaceous articulated plates and ossiculae, supported by a jointed, flexible column. The pelvis, which originally contained the viscera of the animal, is surrounded by long, jointed arms or tentaculae, and affixed to the vertebral column by a pentagonal plate placed in the center of the base. The column, in most species, is of an immense length and consists of separate joints or vertebrae, regularly united, pierced in the center, and having their articulating surfaces ornamented with radiating, stellular, or floriform markings. The inferior part of the column has a pedicle, or process of attachment, by which the animal was fixed to other substances. In the recent state, the skeleton was in all probability clothed with a fleshy or coriaceous integument. The central perforation in the vertebral column is supposed by Mr. Martin to have been filled with a medullary substance, by which sensation was conveyed to the inferior extremities of the animal, but according to Mr. Miller, it served as an alimentary canal. The detached vertebrae are known to collectors by the name of trochitae, and when several are united together so as to form part of a column, the series is termed an entrochite. The remains of this family of zoophytes so rarely occur in the chalk formation that portions of 2 or 3 species are the only examples hitherto found in Sussex. Of these, the most important is the bottle encrinite of Parkinson, Apiocrinites of Miller, which we shall now proceed to examine. 26. Apiocrinites ellipticus, Tablet 16, Figures 3, 12. Miller's crinoidea, page 34. A crinoidal animal having a column composed of oval joints, articulating by a transversely grooved surface, the 2 upper joints of the column enlarged, sustaining the pelvis, costae, etc. The column provided with auxiliary sidearms. Base formed by numerous irregular columnar joints, sending off fibers for adhesion to other bodies. Miller's crinoideae, page 33. The different parts of this animal were first described by Mr. Parkinson under the various names of bottle, straight, and stag's horn encrinite, and have since been accurately investigated by Mr. Miller, who considers them as belonging but to one species, which he has placed in his first division of the crinoidea, in the same genus with the celebrated pear encrinite of Bradford. The column of this species consists of smooth ossiculae, somewhat enlarging in the middle, their articulating surfaces being elliptical, finely granulated, and having 2 narrow transverse ridges, in the center of which is the small perforation containing the alimentary canal. The pelvis or body is of a tumid utricular form, and is divided into separate ossiculae of various shapes, to which the names of ribs, clavicles, and scapulae, etc., have been applied by the authors above quoted. The specimens in my possession were discovered too late to admit of insertion in the engravings. The entrochites delineated in Tablet 16 do not exhibit the transverse ridges generally observed on the areae of the columnar joints, but in other respects they perfectly correspond with those of the present species. Figure 3 consists of 16 vertebrae, some of which are partially disunited. The articulating surfaces are smooth and even. the central perforation very small. From the diminutive size and elongated form of this specimen, it may probably be a portion of the sidearms or lateral appendages. Figure 12 is composed of 8 ossiculae and is evidently part of the vertebral column of the present species. Part of the vertebral column of a pentacrinite. This specimen is formed of 11 thin pentagonal vertebrae with markings on their articulating surfaces, precisely similar to those represented in Tablet 8, Figure 64, Organic Remains, Volume 2. 28. A single vertebra of a quadrangular form, the angles rounded. The surface ornamented with figures resembling a floret of 4 rays. The entrachite number 1170 of Lude is composed of ossiculae, perfectly resembling the specimen here described. Trochitae of 4 rays are very rare. Mr. Parkinson mentions that he had seen but one, Figure 59, Tablet 8, Volume 2, Organic Remains, and that is very dissimilar to the fossil in question. Marsupites. This genus is formed for the reception of a fossil that has hitherto been placed among the encrinites, from which, however, it differs most essentially in being destitute of a vertebral column and processes of attachment. Hence, it is obvious that the recent animal, instead of being fixed to one spot, was capable of locomotion, and floated ad libitum, like the medusae and some other zoophytes. Mr. Parkinson, whose publication on the organic remains of a former world forms an important era in oryctological science, was the first author that accurately noticed these interesting remains. In his second volume, an admirable description is given of the pelvis of the animal under the name of tortoise encrinite, and very recently the structure of the original has been ably illustrated by the ingenious author of the Natural History of the Crinoidea, who has adopted the name by which I have been accustomed to distinguish it. The following definition is the result of an attentive examination of more than 100 specimens, but as the recent animal is unknown and the fossils never recur in a perfect state, it is very probable that some of those characters which are here assumed as permanent distinctions may hereafter prove to be only accidental varieties of form. 29. Marsupites milleri. Tablet 16, Figures 6, 7, 8, 9, 13, 14, 15. General characteristics. Body orbicular, contained in a pelvis composed of crustaceous plates, having 5 articulated arms or tentaculae proceeding from the margin. The opening of the pelvis covered by articulated ossiculae, in the center of which the mouth is placed. Special characteristics. Pelvis composed of 16 convex, radiated, angular plates, the arms dichotomous, united to the margin by a corresponding number of intermediate semilunar bones, the ossiculae covering the aperture of the pelvis disposed in a proboscidal form. The fossil remains of this zoophyte have hitherto been found only in the upper chalk of Sussex and Wiltshire, and like most other crustaceous bodies enclosed in that deposit, are transmuted into a spathos calcareous spar. But one species is known. The following description will therefore illustrate both the generic and specific characters. This fossil is generally of a suborbicular form, more or less distorted, with the lower extremity closed and obtuse, and the upper truncated and open, being filled with chalk or flint. It is composed of numerous thin angular plates that are not united as in the echinites, but are simply held in apposition to each other by the chalk in which they are embedded. The name of cluster stones given them by the workmen not inaptly expresses their general appearance. The pelvis, or cavity in which the viscera of the animal were contained, is very capacious, and is composed of 16 angular convex plates, arranged in the following manner, namely, 1. A pentagonal plate, abdominal, placed in the center of the base. 2. 5 pentagonal costal plates attached to the sides of the center. 3. 5 hexagonal intercostal plates placed between the superior angles formed by the union of the costal. 4. 5 pentagonal scapular plates filling up the angles in the superior margin of those last described, each having a semilunar depression on their marginal edge. These form the margin of the pelvis, properly so called. These 16 plates are succeeded by 5 semilunar ossiculae, clavicles, attached to the articulating depressions of the scapular plates. 6. 5 cuneiform ossiculae, cuneiform or humeral bones, attached to the clavicles. These are the first bones of the arm, and their superior edge is divided into 2 articulations, from which the tentaculae are sent off. 7. Numerous reniform ossiculae, by which the aperture of the pelvis is closed. The plates of the pelvis are convex, sometimes umbonated in the center, and ornamented with radiated ridges on the external surface. Their markings vary in different examples, and even in the same individual. Specimens occurring in which some of the plates are nearly smooth, and others richly ornamented. Figure 13, Tablet 16, represents a plate with prominent ridges extending from the center to the angles, the intermediate surface being covered with numerous diverging striae. In Figure 14, the center is slightly umbonated, and the markings are coarser and less regular than in the former variety. The ridges are obtuse, and the diverging striae few and irregular. The plates in Figure 15 are perfectly smooth, with the exception of a few folds near the margin. In every instance, however, the edges of the plates are more or less crenulated, and when united form a suture in the same manner as the scales of the tortoise, but they readily separate when the chalk is removed. The central or abdominal plate is larger and more depressed than the surrounding costals. The latter are readily distinguished by their pentagonal and the intercostals by their hexagonal form. The scapulae are generally less ornamented than the rest of the series and are easily identified by the semilunar cavity in their upper edge. This articulating surface is traversed by a longitudinal ridge with a minute depression in the center, and is adapted for the reception of the clavicles. The clavicles are small and of a semilunar form externally. The upper edge is thick, nearly straight, and unites with the humerus. The lowermost is rounded and corresponds with the semilunar cavity of the scapula. Between these two surfaces on the inside is a triangular space, the use of which is not at present known. The cuneiform or humeral bones may be considered as the first of the arms. They have 4 articulations and are attached to the clavicles by the 2 lowermost. Their upper margin forms 2 oblique surfaces, each divided by a longitudinal ridge, in the same manner as the first joint of the finger in the Bradford encrinite, Apiocrinites rotundus. From this structure it may be inferred that the arms were dichotomous, but whether they were subdivided and terminated in elongated tentaculae, as in the crinoidea, cannot be ascertained, since none of the specimens contain any vestiges of the ossiculae of these appendages. On the inner surface of the humerus, a smooth space is observable, appearing like a continuation of the triangular interval on the corresponding part of the clavicle. Is this the articulating surface for the attachment of the pectoral bones? The reniform ossiculae, or pectoral bones, are united to each other by their upper and under surfaces, both of which are divided by a ridge into depressions. Both of which are divided by a ridge into 2 depressions. In the only specimen, Tablet 16, Figure 6, in which these bones remain, the respective parts have suffered so much displacement that their mode of arrangement is no longer distinguishable. There is, however, reason to conclude that in the recent animal they were attached to an epidermis extending over the cavity of the pelvis in the form of a proboscis, the mouth being placed in the center. From this examination of the skeleton of the marsupite, it is evident that the recent animal was nearly related to the crinoidea, but the absence of the vertebral column separates it most decidedly from that tribe. It may, however, as Mr. Miller observes, be considered as forming a link between the crinoidea articulata and the stellaridae. The folds, radiating ridges, and striae on the plates, and the lateral adhesion of plate to plate by simple sutures, plainly indicate that the whole were invested by a muscular integument, the markings on the plates being the effects of its action. From the rudiments of the arms, it is also equally obvious that the recent animal was furnished with tentaculae, to enable it to seize and detain its prey, in the same manner as the encrinites, etc. Its position when floating in the water was in all probability with the mouth downwards, like the Medusa pulmo, campanulata, and other species of that family. The specific name is in commemoration of the valuable researches of my friend J.S. Miller, Esquire, A.L.S. of Bristol, a tribute of respect to which his able investigation of the natural history of the crinoidea justly entitles him. Tablet 16, Figure 6, represents the only specimen in which the reniform or pectoral ossiculae remain. But the plates have suffered so much displacement from compression that their relative situation is not very obvious without careful examination. It does not, however, appear probable that the proboscidal form in which the pectoral bones are disposed is the effect of accident, since a similar structure prevails in the actinocrinites and several other zoophytes. A clavicle united with one of the humeral bones is seen attached to the scapula near the middle of the figure. Figure 7. The semilunar depression on the upper margin of a scapula. Figure 8. Outline of the clavicle. Figure 9. A clavicle and humerus united. Figure 13. 14. Detached costal plates, the one finely striated, the other with obtuse ridges. Figure 15. The entire pelvis, consisting of the abdominal, costal, intercostal, and scapular plates. Specimens of this kind, more or less distorted, are the only parts of the animal generally found. The clavicles, humeral bones, etc., are among the rarest productions of the chalk formation. Localities: Offham, Preston, Clayton, and Brighton chalk pits. The last mentioned locality was first discovered by George Cumberland, Esquire, of Bristol, to whose liberality I am indebted for the information. Asteria, or starfish. But few remains of these animals have been discovered in Sussex, although they are not uncommon in the Kentish chalk. 30. The specimens in my possession consist of a few detached ossiculae of Pentagonaster semilunatus, Organic Remains, Volume 3, Tablet 1, Figure 1, and fragments of a species that appears to be distinct from any previously known.